is lost to us. That he apostatized, that he denounced God in public and surrendered the faith, and is now living as a Japanese.
That's not possible. Father Ferreira risked his life to spread our faith all over Japan. We're here today because of him.
Yes, he was. He's the strongest of us.
He wrote those words during the most sweeping persecution of all. Now things are even worse. Thousands are dead because of what we brought them. Thousands more have given up the faith.
If it is true, Father, what would it mean for the Jesuits, for the whole of Catholic Europe? It seems to me that our mission here is more urgent than ever. We must go find Father Ferreira.
Do you know how many Christians the authorities executed at Shimabara? Thousands. Tens of thousands. Most of them beheaded. No, it is far too dangerous for you.
Yes, but Father, how do we neglect the man that nurtured us in the faith? If he shapes the world for us.
And even if the slander should be true, then Father Ferreira is damned.
Yes. And we have no choice but to save his soul.
This is in your hearts, then, both of you?
Yes.
It is. Like our first fervor.
And I must trust God has put it there.
Well, good morning, everyone. Again, it's good to be here and worshiping with you this morning. We're starting a new sermon series this week. Actually, it really started on Wednesday, on Ash Wednesday, which is the beginning of our 40-day journey. I'm calling it the Jesus Journey for Sunday morning, and it's Lenten season. Lent is an old English word that means springtime. Somebody needs to tell God. But but what it is actually, this is a great metaphor, because we're moving from winter into spring, and we are moving from the season of death into the season of life and hope. And as we do that, we're going to journey with Jesus, and it's a journey we take as a church, but it's also a very personal journey for each and every one of us. We will be walking through stories that talk about hidden treasures, and stories that remind us of the centrality of forgiveness in our lives. And finally, we will end up talking about the transformation, the ultimate move from death to life, called the resurrection on Easter Sunday. And so we start today, though, with Jesus' own journey, with the temptation in the wilderness, walking 40 days through the wilderness. And this movie clip just came to mind. Actually, came to mind because of a conversation I had with Don just this last week. The movie's called Silence. It came out in 2016. Big name director Martin Scorsese directed the film. Liam Neeson is in the film, and that was Andrew Garfield and Adam Driver. I think I got all that right. But this is a story, true story, about 17th century Japan. And originally Christians were allowed in, Christian missionaries were allowed in, but the missionary effort had become so successful that it began to threaten the Japanese culture and way of life. And so in the early 17th century, Christianity was outlawed. And so this was also called the Kira Christiana, the time of the hidden Christians. Christianity was deeply persecuted, brutally persecuted. And so Christians had to go underground. By the way, in a very short space of time, 20, 30 years, 500,000 people converted to Christianity in Japan during this time. But the backlash was bloody and horrid. And so we pick up this story with a guy by the name of Father Ferreira. He is the greatest of all Christian missionaries, a Jesuit priest, who is in Japan, and he is also the first priest to denounce the faith, to apostatize. And he does this after hours of torture, and then also watching some of the people that he brought into Christianity being murdered. And so word gets back to Portugal, and two of his students, Rodriguez and Guerrera, the two that you saw there, need to go to Japan. They feel this call to go. They want to go and see the Christians in Japan. They want to go and hear their suffering and be a part of that suffering and bring them relief. But most of all, they need to go and see if their teacher has indeed left the faith, and if so, they need to save him. And they know it's going to be dangerous, but if their teacher has failed, they will not fail. They will not fall to that temptation. So hold on to that, and let's sing first verse of our hymn. So we're talking about temptation today, and the story that was just read, and a little bit of background on this story. This happens at the beginning of Jesus' ministry. In fact, right at the beginning. So Jesus has gone to the Jordan River. He's been baptized by John. As he comes up from the water, there is the Spirit of God that descends upon him in the bodily form of a dove, and there is a voice from heaven that says, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." And then Jesus goes out into the wilderness, and he spends 40 days in the wilderness, and the devil is tempting him, and he doesn't eat anything for 40 days. And the scriptures then say at the end of that 40 days, Jesus is hungry. And that becomes the opportunity for the devil. So the devil approaches him. And he has three temptations for Jesus. The first temptation is this: Jesus, we know you're hungry, and hunger is not good for you. We want you to take care of this yourself. There are stones. You know that you could, in a moment's time, just change those stones into bread, and then your hunger is satisfied. And Jesus sends that temptation away. And then the next temptation comes along, and the devil shows Jesus all the kingdoms of the earth in a moment of time. And the devil says, you know, you've come to be the king of the world. I can do that for you without going any further through this thing that you're about to go through, Jesus. Just bow down, worship me, and I have the authority to give you these things. The kingdoms of the world will be yours. No death, no resurrection, none of that stuff. You don't have to deal with any of that. And Jesus sends that one away. And then the third one, very, very top of the temple. The devil takes him up there, and they're looking over the edge of the temple, and the devil says, just throw yourself off, because you're not going to be hurt. It says in the scriptures that the angels will minister to you lest you strike your foot against a stone. And Jesus sends that one away as well. 3 temptations: the need to satisfy hunger, power, and safety. Basic human needs. And Jesus sends them all 3 away, all 3 temptations. And you know, when we talk about temptations, I think we have this idea that, and it's kind of a misidea, that temptations are about being drawn towards something. And I'd like you to think about temptations a little differently. It's not being drawn towards something, it's being pulled away from something else. And that something that you're being pulled away from is your relationship with God. Okay, so here's how it works. So it looks like Jesus is being drawn to the stones. Jesus, you're hungry. Take the stones, turn them into bread. You can do this yourself. That's the key word, yourself. And so if Jesus goes and turns those into bread, and he takes and he eats them, he will be satisfied for a moment. But then the hunger returns. Because in the end, the bread can't possibly satisfy human hunger. Meanwhile, what's happened is that as he's moved towards the stones, and as he's taken the bread, and as he's eaten it, believing that it will satisfy him, he has walked away from the one thing that satisfies all hunger for all times: his relationship with God. So you see, temptation is not about being drawn towards something. It's being pulled away from a relationship, an all-important relationship. Now, hunger comes in many forms, right? There's physical hunger. That's what Jesus was dealing with. But we all have hunger in our soul. Things that we know are missing in our lives. There's an emptiness there. I mean, maybe you don't like the way you look, and so you try to fix that. Maybe you want to satisfy something in your soul that's missing, and you attach it to stuff. And so you think, if only I just go buy that piece of clothing, it'll make me look good and I'll feel good. And you go and do that for a moment, thinking that it's going to take care of this need that's inside of you, this gnawing hunger. And it does for a minute, but then all of a sudden the hunger's back. And so the devil says, okay, so how about this one over here? How about that pair of pants? Let's grab that. And so you go over here, you buy the pants, you put them on, they look good, you feel good for a few minutes, and the hunger returns. Oh, there's a pair of shoes, and they're only $95. Grab those. And you do, and it feels good for a moment. You see where this is going, right? It's like the little Dutch boy. You keep putting your fingers in the holes in the dike, but you can't possibly keep up with it. Because you see, it's not the thing that you're drawn to. That's not the temptation. It's being drawn away from Christ, from the God who makes all things new and satisfies your soul in ways that nothing else can. What's the first commandment? Anybody know? I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. Right? And that's what he's doing when he draws us away. Or when we think we're drawn towards something. We're going towards something that's supposed to satisfy us. But it's a false god. Definition of a false god is something that promises to give you what you need, but it cannot fulfill the promise. It can't deliver on what it promises. That's a false god. What's the true God? The true God is the one who, as you are with him, as you walk with him, there are no more needs. Everything is completed because you are living with the God and walking with the God who fills you in ways that nothing else can. Let's take a break and sing. So about 2-3 weeks ago, I ran into an old friend, and we got into conversation. Hadn't really talked to this person in quite a while, and just sort of, how you doing? Everything going okay? Yeah, everything's great. And I knew some things about her, and I said, so how are things going with AA? And she said, I'm pushing 30 years being sober. And I said, that's great. That's great. And then she said something that just surprised me. She said, alcohol has been the greatest blessing of my life. I said, tell me more. And I said, well, she said, I get up every single morning, and because of the alcohol, I know that without Jesus, I would never make it through the day. She said, don't get me wrong. This thing was costly. I lost family members. I lost jobs over it. But now it has become a blessing because it keeps me close to Jesus. Isn't that interesting? See, it doesn't matter where you go here. It's who comes along with you. And sometimes the places that you go are pretty destructive. But sometimes they clothe themselves in some really good intentions. And that's why I wanted to show you this movie, because the end of the movie, and by the way, it did not do well in the box office, but see it if you get a chance. It is, in terms of Christian content, one of the best movies I've ever seen. It's hard to watch, but see it. So towards the end of the movie, one of the young priests finally meets up with his mentor, with Ferrara. This guy's name is Rodriguez, and he is faced with a decision. He will either step on a plaque that is an image of Christ, in effect trampling on Christ and publicly denouncing the faith that he has upheld, or else he will continue to watch as more Japanese Christians are brutally murdered. Watch this.
There is something more important than the judgment of the church.
It's only a formality. Just a formality.
Come ahead now. It's all right. Step on me. I understand your pain. I was born into this world to share men's pain. I carried this cross for your pain. Your life is with me now. Step.
So Rodriguez publicly denies his faith. And in the denouncement, there is Jesus walking beside him, taking him by the hand. Come along. See, life is not about its successes. It's not about going to Japan. It's not about changing the world. It's not about saving his mentor. It's about a relationship with God that in a world of trial and trouble of sin, where sometimes even right is wrong, there is Jesus. And he gives up his successes. And he gives up his reputation. He will become one of the fallen priests. And he gives up everything in his life that he knew out of love for the people that he shepherded into the faith to save them. And that's what Jesus did for him. All the while, as he's making that sacrifice, as he is publicly failing, Jesus is beside him. What are your failures? What are your trials? What are your troubles? Where are the places in your life where even right turns wrong and you have absolutely no control over it? The temptation is not to go towards those things. The temptation is to walk away from the one who walks with you and through those things. Stay close to those trials and troubles. Stay close to those things that cause you to fall. Because as you do, you will find in them and through them that Jesus is walking with you. Amen.